Welcome to Inside Manufacturing. I'm Todd Bingham, your host, President and CEO of the Utah Manufacturers Association. I'm excited today to have Mike Dankler with me here from Michael Best Strategies. Visit with Michael here in just a minute. Michael Best Strategies they offer full strategic business consulting. They're a lobbying and governmental relations, public affairs and communications, procurement and defense organization. They've got offices all across the country, and they help clients build relationships on influential issues and craft strategies to deal with their business objectives. Today, we've got, as I indicated, Michael Dankler here with us. Mike, you're a principal with MBS. You've got a vast history of experience, more than a decade of experience on Capitol Hill. I know you were chief of staff to the late Representative Jackie Walorski, Republican from Indiana, and I know that you helped position her as a thought leader on the House Ways and Means Committee. You also were instrumental in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, as well as the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement, with dealing with aluminum, as well as the China tariffs and many other things. So a lot of history for you on policy and tax. So really excited to have you here with us today as we talk about what's going on in Washington, D.C. and what's happening. So tell us a little bit more about yourself before we get started, Mike.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, thanks for that introduction, and thanks for having me. But you kind of covered it in the bio. I spent a little over 10 years on Capitol Hill. Kind of did every job started as an intern and ended up as the chief of staff. So saw a lot along the way, and now I help clients, build relationships on Capitol Hill, understand what's happening in Washington, and especially, for me, just coming up through the House Ways and Means Committee, which has jurisdiction over tax policy, healthcare, trade, especially homing in on those kind of policy areas. But did a little bit of everything, because in the House you become a generalist, so you learn about a lot, and I'm happy to be here to talk with you today.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Looking forward to this. As I indicated off camera, we're both kind of political geeks, and we'll try and keep this simple for our companies out there in the manufacturing arena. You and I could grab lunch and talk for hours on this type of stuff. It's just the illness that we both share. But give me your predictions on the lame duck session. What's happening back there? What do you predict?
Yeah, I think obviously the elections were kind of one thing holding everybody back, because you have to know who's going to keep hold of which chamber and everything. All that had to sort itself out, so everybody knew what their negotiating disposition was going to be. It's a different thing if the Democrats held both the House and the Senate, then they say, oh, we don't need to clear the decks at all. But now that we're looking at divided government next year, those incentives change, and so there's a lot to do. There are a lot of things. You have government funding, which runs out, I believe, on December 16th. So there's just a matter of keeping the lights on. But you have major defense bills. The National Defense Authorization Act is out there. You also have a number of other policies that have been hanging around for a while. There's what we call tax extenders. There's a lot of lapsed trade incentive programs. There's health issues. There's a little bit of everything hanging out there. There's even talk about doing immigration. So they're kind of talking about a lot of stuff right now. The question is, what, and we'll get to the rail strike probably too. And so, but to mix my metaphors, there's a train leaving the station. How many cars can you attach to it before it goes? And of course, you can't rule out the possibility of failure, that it all is just, it's too big of a negotiation and just collapses under its own weight too. So, ultimately, I'm still relatively bullish that we'll see some sort of an omnibus. There's both just to kind of clear the decks for policy. I think that's in Republicans' interest and Democrats' interest. Also, because Congress is Congress, you have the two top senators on the Appropriations Committee, Richard Shelby and Patrick Leahy, are retiring at the end of at the end of this Congress, and so for their legacy, I think they want to get one more bite at the apple, one more thing done before they hang up their spurs.
So walk us through just quickly on where the numbers are with both the Senate and the House right now for our companies. Obviously, we've still got the runoff in Georgia and what's happening there, but where are we at with numbers there currently?
Yeah, so the Senate is at 50-49. Democrats will hold, the Senate no matter what because they have that tiebreaker in Kamala Harris.
Right.
As you point out, the question is whether that December 6th runoff in Georgia means it's a 51-49 majority or
Doesn't really matter
50-50
at this point,
majority.
right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, really, for Democrats, the key thing was holding the Senate. The House, obviously, you'd love to hold both chambers, but if you're going to keep one of them, keep the Senate because that means all your nominees can still move forward. So that was actually a big thing for them was to keep that chamber. Over in the House, we still don't have results from every single race yet. I think the last I saw, the margin is 220 Republicans to 213 Democrats, and there's two uncalled seats because it's just very thin margins.
Right.
And so I think they're doing recounts and things. But those are likely to go Republican. The Republicans are in the lead, so it'll very likely be 222 to 213, which means Republicans. It's basically a mirror image of what Democrats have been dealing with the last 2 years. That you can only lose about 4 votes on a given vote, and that's very tough, to muster a majority like that and to run the House. We're seeing even right now that Kevin McCarthy, who'd be the Republicans' nominee for Speaker, is still trying to line up votes even to be the Speaker. So we have that vote on January 3rd, and that's it's not a given. He's got to cut some deals to get to that point. So it's going to be a very interesting couple years ahead here.
Yeah, and I think a lot of our folks don't perhaps even understand how that works. But to your point, if it is Speaker McCarthy, you've got these caucuses or different divisions within those 222, if that's what it ends up being, is what will it take for all of those Republicans to support him as Speaker? And as you indicated, what kind of deals are going to go on there? And then you've got the discussion of current Speaker Pelosi and what happens there, and what happens with the Democrats. Let me bounce back just for a second to the Senate as well. As we talked about, that the Georgia race doesn't necessarily matter in terms of whether it's 51-49 or 50-50, because as you indicated, the vice president has the deciding vote there. But it potentially does matter as you look over the next 2 years to see what Georgia does. And historically, Georgia wasn't necessarily a swing seat, but in the last 10 years, Georgia has definitely become a swing seat. So if you're thinking about it from a presidential discussion, if Republicans win Georgia, then that certainly bodes well for them potentially in a presidential election, and likewise for Democrats as well. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, Georgia's, I mean, and some of these states just had weird cases because you had, Brian Kemp won running away for the governorship. So,
Right.
I think one of those big takeaways from the election, from the midterms, is that candidate quality matters. And so, maybe Warnock can squeak out a victory here, but I think some of that is probably due to Herschel Walker not being the strongest candidate that maybe could have run there. And so, it is, you have that across a bunch of different, we saw that in Ohio, even though JD Vance won, Mike DeWine was way ahead of him. You had a lot of interesting cross currents there, especially on the Republican side, where you saw people saying, okay, I like this person, but I'm not going to vote for this person, and kind of going down the ticket and splitting, which is has always been a phenomenon, but people kind of had buried it and maybe a little prematurely there.
Yeah, I think to your point there, we've seen much more in the last decade where many more people are voting against a candidate rather than in favor of a candidate. I think that goes to your point of quality of candidate matters, as you indicated, right? A lot of folks voting against a candidate just simply not because they love the other candidate, but because they just simply perhaps maybe choosing the lesser two evils.
Right.
And that, I think, speaks to a whole nother discussion we could have at a both a state and a federal level on candidate quality and why individuals either don't run for office or I often get that from my non-political friends that ask me, we've got 300 plus million people in this country, and these are the two individuals that I get to vote for president. It's not as simple as that when you talk about all of the primaries and everything like that. But it is a valid question for most of the general public, which is they want to vote for what they believe is a quality candidate. And when they don't have that, sometimes elections get skewed a little bit.
Yep. Nope, that's totally true. You can probably write a doctoral dissertation on all of that and how that all impacts. I mean, it's, having seen it up close with the members I worked for, you go through, I mean, people say the House is an easy job, but it's not. You're away from your family most 4 or 5 days a week. And, especially when you have small children, that's, you're missing football games and lacrosse and whatever, whatever sport they play, high school plays, things like that. And, I mean, especially towards the end, the most recent member I worked for would get, she would get hassled around the grocery store. It's like, do you want to do that? Do you want to subject yourself to that? It's tough. But yeah, that's probably a conversation for another time. And,
right.
Because you could just keep going and going on that.
Yeah. So you mentioned just a little bit ago, Mike, you talked about obviously the budget and with the government shutdown looming. What do you think happens on there? Do you think we hit a shutdown?
I think in the near term, the risk is relatively low, but we've just seen this propensity to play with fire. Especially on the Republican side, they tend to latch onto something and want to, 2013 was Obamacare. We did kind of a partial shutdown over the border. And you look, it seems like the thing that a lot of people are latching onto right now is the recent influx of funding for the IRS that was in the Inflation Reduction Act. So, again, small margins. And to your point, the coalition on the Republican side in the House is especially fraught. You have what they call the Freedom Caucus, which is kind of the most conservative wing there. But, the Republican majority was really made in New York with some seats that went for President Biden by 10 plus points. So those members are going to have a completely different disposition and viewpoint on a lot of those strategic calculations. So, it seems like I'm not going to discount that possibility. I'd rather not see that. I think a lot of people would rather not see that. But, sometimes, especially when you have a new majority, when you have new members, they haven't been in the majority, they don't have that responsibility for governing. And they've just kind of come up through the minority where you just say no to everything and you don't have to say yes. Sometimes that can cause some growing pains, and you almost have to go through one of those and you say, oh, that was a bad idea. We didn't come out looking so good. So let's not do that again. But we'll see. I'm hoping that we don't have to do that. But again, I look out at the landscape and see some reasons some clouds on the horizon, just, of things that could get used as a reason to kind of play that brinksmanship. And when you mention government funding too, you also have to mention the debt limit,
right,
which is even more so playing with fire. Never happened before. Full faith and credit of the United States. Democrats are already warning that Republicans are going to play, and seek entitlement cuts and things like that. I think that's probably a little overwrought. Doesn't mean they won't, try to extract some concessions and extract some cuts on that. I don't know that they'll go after entitlements. We'll see. I think they were kind of over-interpreting some statements from Republicans, but that's always been an inflection point. That's always been an incredibly tough vote for Republicans to take, especially when they're in the majority. So there's two kind of, it's a twin factor there between not just the government funding and just day-to-day operations, but the debt limit as well.
I'm gonna ask a question here, make a statement that may have my my extreme or maybe more conservative folks screaming at me. But is there an argument to be made that splitting of bodies in Congress actually can have a potential for creating good policy and good legislation? And what I mean by that is there are oft times here in Utah where we are so heavily one way or the other that perhaps legislation that maybe needs a little bit more time to cook, maybe isn't quite ready for prime time, can get passed because one body holds or both bodies hold a majority. Now, DC obviously in Congress is much slower working than that, but is there an argument to be made that some balance, one body versus the other, can be a good thing?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say so. I think that's how the founders envisioned the House and the Senate interplaying there, where you have, a higher bar, 60 votes in the Senate. So that necessarily requires compromise and things like that. We've obviously gotten a little away from that in recent times. We've tended, Republicans and Democrats both have used what's called budget reconciliation, which only requires 51, well, majority 50 plus one votes in the Senate. That's how the Inflation Reduction Act happened. That's how the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act happened. So, but that I think that was how it was envisioned in the start, and that's I think where you talk about lowering the filibuster threshold and things like that. Then if you kind of housify the Senate, policies I think will be less thought through. Just having seen it from both sides. The House can be very reactionary. They can pass something in theory, again, usually with bigger margins, but it's a little tougher these days. But the House is designed to be a little quicker acting than the Senate. The Senate's supposed to think through it a little more, and just on a staff level, the House and the Senate are completely different animals. I was on the Hill for 12 years and only went to the Senate a couple times because we were just so consumed with what we were doing on a day-to-day basis that you do have to work with the Senate colleagues every now and then. But it's I think the way they set it up has worked relatively well, but we are starting to get away from that a little bit, and that's where you start to worry because I mean, you look at what happened with the Inflation Reduction Act. It has some issues. Tax Cut and Jobs Act had some issues. We have the grain glitch and some other things that went wrong, and it's just because you had to pass it with what you had, and that was that. So whereas a little more deliberation probably could have ironed out some of those things, caught them quicker before you had to fix them all on the back end, and then enter negotiations because then you need the other side to come along with it. So yeah, it's from a philosophical standpoint, it is a good thing to split them in theory. It's just as we've in more recent times, compromises become a little more difficult to come by, and that it's something, again, looking at what majority, the type of majority that Speaker McCarthy is going to have to deal with. He may have to try to figure out that coalition that maybe gets some Democrats on board. We'll see.